and hemoglobin metabolism with reference to the erythropoiesis and RBC production regulation. We will also be discussing the vitamin B12 regulation as it has a role to play in hemoglobin formation and as well as folic acid. So beginning with vitamin B12 and folic acid, crucial role for RBC maturation. And why is it that much important? Vitamin B12 and folic acid are required for the DNA synthesis, that is the building block thymidine triphosphate. Thymidine triphosphate. And if vitamin B12 or folic acid are deficient, this building block will be deficient and DNA synthesis will be impaired. This deficiency would cause poor nuclear maturation. As you have seen the steps of erythropoiesis in the previous session, the nucleus maturation was required to transcribe into RNA, and that was required to translate into proteins, especially the hemoglobin. Now, if the DNA is defective, the formation of stream down proteins and all other machinery will be defective, and nucleus will be incapable of maturing. Rather, the cytoplasm will keep on increasing in size, and nucleus maturation signals would be delayed or not there. Ultimately, the result would be formation of large red blood cells having an inadequate surface area to volume ratio and fragile cell membranes, and they will be hemolyzed very quickly, leading to RBC destruction and ultimately anemia. So these are the macrocytes, abnormally large oval-shaped RBCs having fragile membranes, shorted lifespans, and leading to potential anemia. So simply a vitamin deficiency impaired the DNA synthesis, nuclear maturation, abnormally large RBCs, macrocytes, which were fragile, hemolyzed, and may lead to anemia if the deficiency is intense. Now, from where does the vitamin B12 comes and how is it absorbed in the body? That will give us a clue how vitamin B12 can be deficient. Although we will have its detailed discussion in the GIT module, but we can have a quick overview over here. The vitamin B12 that we eat in our diet, when it comes to the stomach, it binds with an intrinsic factor, which is secreted by the parietal cells of the stomach. This B12 and intrinsic factor complex, this is then taken onto the small intestine, and when it reaches the ileum, here it has the receptor for internalization of vitamin B12. And if this intrinsic factor was not present in the stomach from the parietal cells, the vitamin B12 could not be uptaken by the ileal mucosal cells. So at any level, if you are having a deficient vitamin B12 intake in diet, if your parietal cells are not working, or if your stomach is defective and incapable of producing intrinsic factor, for example, in pernicious anemia, for example, in case of gastrectomy, or in case of high acidity, where B12 will not be capable of combining with the intrinsic factor, its absorption would be reduced. Even if everything is normal till here, when it reaches the ileum, the ileal resection was done for some reason, for example, a tumor or something like that. If ileal resection was done, vitamin B12 uptake would be reduced, and that can also lead to deficiency of vitamin B12 in the diet. So parietal cells of the gastric glands will create intrinsic factor that binds with the B12 and protect B12 from the digestion in the stomach. And this is internalized by the ileal mucosal cells by the pinocytosis. Our daily requirement is 1 to 3 microgram, and our liver fortunately has a 3 to 4 years storage of vitamin B12 in the liver. If someone is deficient in the diet or for some other reason, that deficiency symptoms may not appear for another 3 to 4 years. Atophic gastritis, as I just said, pernicious anemia is one of the major reasons of vitamin B12 deficiency. It is an autoimmune condition in which the parietal cells are destroyed and are incapable of producing intrinsic factor, ileal resection or sprue, that is celiac disease. The ileal mucosa will be damaged, incapable of uptaking vitamin B12. So that was the role of vitamin B12 and folic acid in the maturation of RBCs, and their deficiency could lead to impaired erythropoiesis. Now we are moving towards the discussion of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin molecule is in front of you. As you can see, it's a quaternary protein and it has a porphyrin ring and hemoglobin chains, which are polypeptide chains, alpha or beta type of chains, depending upon the type of hemoglobin we are discussing. And above them, this is, you can see, is the protoporphyrin ring. Hemoglobin is exclusively found in the RBCs and it has two major components, globin content, which is the protein portion, polypeptide chains. Each hemoglobin will have 4 polypeptide chains. The adult hemoglobin is having 2 alpha and 2 beta chains, and these chains are highly folded to maintain a functional structure. The other most important component of hemoglobin is its heme portion, which is having 4 iron containing heme groups. This is the non-protein portion, and 1 per polypeptide chain. So let me go back to the image. Each polypeptide chain, as you can see over here, there are 4 polypeptide chains, 2 alpha and 2 beta over here, and on the right side you are seeing a structure of 1 polypeptide chain, which is having this protoporphyrin ring with 1 iron. So in one hemoglobin molecule there will be 4 iron atoms and 4 polypeptide chains. This is the structure of one chain as you are looking over here on the right side of the image. Hemoglobin is also acting as a pigment, because of which the arterial blood, when oxygenated, turns red, and deoxygenated, it turns bluish. If we talk about hemoglobin synthesis, you will see in detail in biochemistry, but quickly going through it. First of all, a pyrrole ring is formed. And how is it formed? 2 succinyl CoA and 2 glycine join to form 4 pyrrole rings. These 4 pyrrole rings join to form 1 protoporphyrin ring, protoporphyrin 9. And this protoporphyrin combines with iron to form 1 heme group. So it started with formation of 4 pyrrole rings. These 4 pyrrole rings join to form 1 protoporphyrin ring that combined with 1 iron to form 1 heme group. And each heme group will combine with either alpha or beta chain to form 1 hemoglobin subunit. And 4 of these hemoglobin subunits, 2 alpha, 2 beta chains, will combine to form 1 hemoglobin molecule. Among adults, hemoglobin A, these are 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. Each hemoglobin has 4 polypeptide chains. As you know, each chain has 1 heme prosthetic group. So number of iron in each hemoglobin molecule will be, of course, 4. And each iron can bind to 1 oxygen molecule. That is why 1 hemoglobin can bind 4 oxygen molecules. So can you think of some types of hemoglobin you already know of? A few are in front of you. In embryonic life, we have Gower and Eta and Portland hemoglobins. In fetal life, we have fetal hemoglobin, adult life, hemoglobin A, hemoglobin A1C majorly, and there are abnormal hemoglobins as well. Fetal hemoglobin has 2 alpha and 2 gamma chains instead of 2 beta chains. Hemoglobin A1C is simply a glycated form of hemoglobin A and used as an indicator for prognostic marker for diabetes mellitus as well. Abnormal forms examples include hemoglobin S, in which beta chain glutamic acid is replaced by valine, as seen is sickle cell anemia. And there are hemoglobin C and SC and many other abnormal forms of hemoglobin other than this. So embryonic hemoglobin includes zeta and epsilon chains and may combine in various combinations to form early embryonic stage hemoglobin cover or protein. Fetal hemoglobin has two alpha into gamma chains and it is predominant during fetal life and it has a much higher oxygen binding capacity than the adult hemoglobin. 2.5% of adults' hemoglobin is also still fetal hemoglobin. Adult hemoglobin A1 has two alpha to beta chains. It is most dominant after birth. Glycated hemoglobin is having a glucose attached to the terminal V line of each beta chain. This is a non-enzymatic glycation and it has a clinical importance, prognostic matter for diabetes mellitus, an indicator of glucose control over the past approximately 3 months. This graph is showing the change of chains of hemoglobin over the age, starting from the fetal age till the birth. There was initially epsilon and zeta. Those were reduced after the embryonic life. In fetal life, gamma chain and alpha chain were most prominent. In adult life, alpha and beta chain are most prominent and gamma chain has reduced. And this switching is based upon the oxygen availability, which acts as a precursor to switch from gamma chains to the beta chains. Hemoglobin electrophoresis can be used for quantifying the amount of hemoglobin of different types in the blood. As you can see, it measures the travel distance from cathode away towards the anode. And normal adult hemoglobin is moving farthest away and different levels will be used for identification. For example, sickle cell trait over here, sickle cell disease over here, hemoglobin C here, and much more. Hemoglobins, as you know, can bind oxygen to their iron in the heme group. This oxygen binds in molecular form rather than the ionic form. As you can see, oxygen forms loose coordination bond with the iron. Also, hemoglobin can bind with carbon dioxide. It can bind hydrogen ions to act as a pH buffer. It can also bind with carbon monoxide, and the carbon monoxide binding capacity is 200 times more than that of the oxygen. And carbon monoxide binds at the same site as that of the oxygen, whereas binding site of carbon dioxide is different from the oxygen. It can also carry nitric oxide. Hemoglobin has iron in the ferrous form, and if some oxidizing agent oxidize it to ferric form, we will now call it methemoglobin, which is less capable of carrying oxygen, in fact cannot bind oxygen, will appear dark colored, lead to cyanotic discoloration of the skin. This is again a pathological condition. Normally, the body has defense mechanisms against these oxidizing agents, the reductase systems, and if those are overcome by certain drugs or by hereditary methemoglobinemia, have the absence of this enzyme, which was keeping the iron in the reduced form. That's all about the types of hemoglobin. Now we will have a quick overview of the iron metabolism. Iron is stored in the adults about 4 to 5 grams, among which 65% is found in hemoglobin, 4% myoglobin, 1% as enzymes, some traveling in the plasma is transferrin, and 15 to 30% is stored. Now, what is transferrin? Is the transport protein that helps in transporting iron from one place to other, whereas the storage form normally is ferritin. And in pathological concentration, if its iron is stored, it will be stored as hemosiderin, transported with transferrin, absorbed from the gut via the apotransferrin, and is lost in feces every day, approximately 0.6 milligrams per day and 0.7 milligrams per day in the menses. So females have average loss of 1.3 milligrams per day. sorry, 0.13 milligrams per day, whereas I was right earlier, it's 1.3 milligrams, and males have a little less loss as compared to the females. This is a flowchart of Galton showing the metabolism of iron. In the plasma, it is traveling in combination with transferrin. In tissues, it is stored either as ferritin or hemosiderin, as heme or enzymes. In RBCs, it is stored as hemoglobin. And upon degradation of these RBCs, the iron is released as free iron and taken back into the plasma or stored or for erythropoiesis. Total body iron, distribution of iron, we just saw this. Mostly the ferritin is stored in the reticuloendothelial system or liver parenchymal cells. Iron absorption, this is a diagram from the Quenon, is done in the ferrous form. The intake is in ferric form and absorbed in the ferrous form, and we have enzymes to convert this. DCYTB you can see, and this ferrous is absorbed by the divalent metal transporters as a co-transport with the hydrogen ions, or the iron may be absorbed from the gut in the form of the heme, and this is even more abundant as compared to direct absorption of the iron. This heme, when absorbed, then be catabolized to release iron as ferrous. If needed, this ferrous will be shifted to the plasma from the basolateral end of the gastrointestinal mucosal cell using this transporter, ferroportin transporter. And if there is no more need in the blood, this will be stored inside the gastrointestinal mucosal cells as ferritin. Once it enters the plasma, this ferrous is again converted into ferritin by hepcidin, and this ferric is now bound to the transferrin and transported to its destination. So, do you think transferrin deficiency can affect erythropoiesis? Of course, transferrin was supposed to carry iron to the site, its destination, like bone marrow. So, if transferrin is not there, how the iron will be transported to the bone marrow, and it may manifest as anemia. Worn out RBCs are phagocytosed by the liver macrophages or spleen macrophages, where it converts into porphyrin. Hemoglobin is released as bilirubin, and iron is recycled, either added to the transferrin pool, used for erythropoiesis, or stored as ferritin. So that was the iron metabolism, and rest we are going to have a look at the hemoglobin metabolism, that what happens to rest of the porphyrin ring after the breakdown of the hemoglobin. So again, this is a flowchart from the Guyton. The fragile RBC in the reticuloendothelial system got catabolized to heme. This heme was converted by heme oxygenase to biliverdin. Now this biliverdin in the liver is converted to unconjugated bilirubin, which is insoluble. To make it soluble, this needs to be converted into the conjugated bilirubin, and this is what happens inside the intestine. This unconjugated bilirubin is conjugated bilirubin in the intestine, and the bacterial action can convert this conjugated bilirubin to urobilinogen, then stercobilirubin, and oxidation which converts it into stercobilin, that gives the feces its characteristic appearance. Whereas most of the conjugated bilirubin, when converted into urobilinogen, was reabsorbed into the bloodstream and taken into the kidneys, from where it was released in the urine and oxidized to urobilin, giving the urine its characteristic pigment yellowish appearance. So we have just discussed this quick overview to discuss the aspect of jaundice. Rest of the details you will be having when you discuss the hepatobiliary module. For now, let's move on to see what jaundice is. So, jaundice is a condition in which the skin white of the eyes and the mucous membranes, for example, of the oral cavity or the eye, turns yellow because of a high level of bilirubin. So jaundice is a condition of high bilirubin that may be conjugated or unconjugated. Normally, it should be less than 1.5 milligrams per deciliter in the blood. If it is more than that, it will become detectable as jaundice, yellowishness of skin sclera in the mucosa. Jaundice can be of three types: prehepatic, hepatocellular, or post-hepatic jaundice. If you look over here, if bilirubin is being produced much more than the capacity of the blood because of some defect over here, we will call it prehepatic. If there is something wrong over here, we will call it hepatic level of jaundice. Or if something wrong over here, we will call it post-hepatic jaundice. In prehepatic, there will be more production of bilirubin, and hepatic jaundice, incapability to conjugate, hemoglobin, and post-hepatic jaundice will be incapable of excreting this conjugated bilirubin. So let's see how will it impact. The pathophysiology: increased hemolysis prehepatic, disturbed conjugation at liver hepatocellular, inability to excrete this conjugated bilirubin is post-hepatic. For example, one of the reasons can be bile duct obstruction. Type of bilirubin raised in case of prehepatic or hemolytic jaundice will of course be unconjugated, as it is exceeding the capacity of liver to conjugate. Hepatocellular jaundice may have a combination of both unconjugated and conjugated bilirubin depending upon the cause. And post-hepatic jaundice will have a raised level of conjugated because liver had conjugated it but is unable to excrete it into the intestine. Liver enzymes will be raised in case of hepatocellular jaundice normally. In case of post-hepatic jaundice, alkaline phosphatase will be raised, which is an indicator of bile duct or pancreatic duct obstruction. AST to ALT ratio will be again deranged in the hepatocellular jaundice case. Urinary urobilinogen. This is formed by the conversion of conjugated bilirubin. So, of course, this will be present in the prehepatic jaundice and it will even be raised. Hepatocellular jaundice, when conjugated bilirubin was less, so urobilinogen will not be formed much, so it would be less. And post-hepatic jaundice, it will be absent as the conjugated bilirubin is unable to enter the intestine and taken back into the plasma circulation and kidney. Stool color will be normal in prehepatic jaundice, will be pale in hepatocellular jaundice because the stercobilin will be reduced, and it will be clay colored in hepatic jaundice as stercobilin will be absent. Vandenberg reaction detects the level of bilirubin. It is indirect positive in the prehemolytic jaundice because it has the raised level of unconjugated bilirubin. Post-hepatic jaundice has raised level of conjugated bilirubin, so it will be direct positive. Hepatic jaundice has increased level of both in unconjugated and conjugated bilirubin, so it will be a biphasic response, both direct and indirect positive.